It's 1929. Istanbul. A librarian named Halil Edhem is cataloguing a forgotten storeroom inside Topkapi Palace, centuries of Ottoman documents that nobody has touched in generations. He unfolds a gazelle-skin parchment. It's a map. Dated 1513. And somewhere in the lower left corner, there is a coastline that should not exist. It would take another 29 years, and the technology of a nuclear-age navy, to confirm what that coastline actually was. This is the story of the Piri Reis map. And the question it raises has never been cleanly answered. Who drew it, and what he claimed the map was signed? Its maker identified himself as Piri Reis, an Ottoman admiral, a naval commander of considerable standing, a man who had sailed the Mediterranean and studied cartography as a professional discipline. He wasn't a mystic or a forger. He was a man with access to the greatest library networks of his age. In the notes he inscribed directly onto the map, Piri Reis was careful about his sources. He listed them. He claimed to have consulted 20 source charts, some from the era of Alexander the Great, others captured from Spanish sailors, some of unknown but clearly ancient origin. He wasn't presenting this as his own discovery. He was, in his own words, compiling. That distinction matters enormously. And we'll come back to it. The map shows the Atlantic Ocean. It shows the western coastlines of Europe and Africa with reasonable accuracy for its era. It shows the eastern coast of South America, depicted before most of that continent had been properly charted. And then, along the bottom edge, it shows something else. A continuous landmass running east to west. Labeled with rivers. Labeled with bays. Labeled with what appear to be mountain ranges. But in 1513, no European expedition had reached anywhere near that part of the world. The measurement that changed everything for centuries, scholars assumed that lower landmass was simply a distorted version of South America, a common cartographic error of the period. The map was curious, but explainable. Then, in 1960, a professor at New Hampshire College named Charles Hapgood received a letter. It had been forwarded from a U.S. Air Force cartographic unit based at Westover Air Force Base. The unit had been asked to analyze the Piri Reis map as part of a broader historical survey project. Their conclusion was not what anyone expected. The cartographers determined that the southern landmass on the Piri Reis map matched, with measurable, documentable accuracy, the subglacial coastline of Antarctica. Not the surface of the ice shelf as we see it today. The rock. The actual geological coastline buried beneath ice that, in most places, runs 2 miles deep. That coastline had been mapped by seismic survey only 2 years earlier, in 1958, as part of the International Geophysical Year. Something had mapped the bedrock of Antarctica. Before the ice. Here is where the official story begins to fall apart. The accepted position, the comfortable position, is that this is coincidence. Or that Piri Reis was mapping Terra Australis Incognita, the theoretical southern continent that European philosophers had hypothesized must exist to balance the northern landmasses. A guess, not a survey. But there are 3 specific problems with that explanation. And the third one sat buried in an archive for the better part of 60 years before researchers began taking it seriously. First, the accuracy. Theoretical maps of Terra Australis were speculative and symmetrical, philosophical constructs, not geographic surveys. They did not include river deltas. They did not include interior mountain ranges. The Piri Reis southern landmass has both. Second, the projection. In the records I've kept on this subject, one detail surfaces repeatedly among mathematicians who've studied it. The map uses a sophisticated spherical projection, a method of translating a curved surface onto flat parchment that accounts for the curvature of the Earth across long distances. That mathematics was not formally developed in Europe until the late 16th century, at least 50 years after Piri Reis compiled his map. Someone in his source material understood it already. Third, and this is the one that was quietly set aside, Hapgood's team identified what they believed was the map's center point of projection. the location from which all the angular measurements radiated outward. It wasn't Cairo. It wasn't Constantinople. It wasn't any major city of the medieval or classical world. It was a point in the middle of Africa, close to the equator. A point that has no obvious historical significance unless the map's original source was drawn from a position, or by a method, that predates every civilization we have a name for. What Hapgood actually argued, this is the part that gets dismissed most quickly, so it deserves careful handling. Charles Hapgood was a professor of the history of science. He was not a fringe writer. His analysis of the Piri Reis map was reviewed, and cautiously endorsed, by none other than Albert Einstein, who wrote a brief foreword to Hapgood's manuscript in 1953, describing the hypothesis as deserving of serious consideration. Hapgood's argument was not that aliens drew the map. His argument was more unsettling than that, because it was more plausible. He proposed that the source charts Piri Reis copied were themselves copies of older charts, that somewhere in the chain of transmission, there existed original surveys made during a period when Antarctica's coastline was ice-free. Geologically, that period is known. Antarctica was last substantially free of its current ice sheet somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 years ago, and in some coastal regions, possibly as recently as that. Few who studied this particular implication published widely on it. The professional cost was significant. If Hapgood was right even in part, it suggests a civilization, or at least a seafaring culture, with the navigational and mathematical sophistication to survey a polar continent existed before any civilization we recognize. And then vanished, leaving only these faint reflections in the records of people who came thousands of years later. What the archives leave open, what I've found in the archives on this subject, is not a clean answer. It's a series of documented anomalies that resist the simplest explanations. The Piri Reis map is real. It lives today in the Topkapi Palace Museum in Istanbul. The Air Force analysis is real. Hapgood reproduced the correspondence in full. The 1958 seismic survey of Antarctica's subglacial coastline is real, published in peer-reviewed geological literature. The gaps between those facts are where the mystery lives. Was there a pre-Ice Age maritime civilization sophisticated enough to survey Antarctica? The geological record says the window existed. The map says something was drawn. What connects them is the part no one can currently prove, and the part that no one has yet been able to disprove. The source charts Piri Reis referenced have never been found. The library at Alexandria, one candidate for where such documents might have been preserved, was destroyed. The Byzantine libraries that Ottoman scholars absorbed contained documents whose full catalogue we will never recover. We know what Piri Reis held in his hands in 1513. We do not know what those 20 ancient source charts contained, or who first made the observations they recorded. The coastline under the ice is there. The map is there. What sat between them, and when, remains one of the only questions in cartographic history that still has no answer the evidence fully supports. If you've been holding a theory through this video, leave it below. The comment records on this channel are, in their own way, an archive worth keeping. Bell subscribe for a new mystery every week. The next one involves a library that was supposedly destroyed twice, and the documents that survived both times.